If you listen to one episode all year, I implore you to listen to this one today of my Daily Tech podcast, because after 650 episodes, I really did walk away quite inspired. After listening to these stories about a man named Patrick McGovern, so much of what he stood for really resonated with me. But just to set the scene, IDG is the world's largest technology media company, and they help their global audience make the smartest technology purchasing decisions. I grew up with the Windows for Dummies book, SQL for Dummies, and in fact any tech subject was covered by those books, who were all made by IDG. Essentially, many of the IDG books transformed how we understand the enormous potential of computers and actually started to think about how they could change the world. And here is where it gets interesting. Founder Patrick McGovern was a pioneer in the information technology industry. In his own way, he was equally as vital as Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, but he never sought the spotlight, and many of his contributions have been overlooked. Pat McGovern is the man who turned IDG into a $3 billion technology, media and venture capital empire. But he's also the eternal optimist that put people and making a difference first, but kept himself in the shadows. I think there's something quite beautiful about that. Glenn Rifkin is an author and contributor to the New York Times who worked with Patrick McGovern very closely, and he's sharing his legacy so others can learn from this inspiring man. It really is a beautiful story that really resonated with me. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way into the heart of Silicon Valley so we can speak with Glenn Rifkin, author of Future Forward. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Glenn. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Neil, for having me here. I am a journalist and author. I have been a business journalist for over 40 years in the U.S., and a lot of that time I've spent contributing to the New York Times. I've also written and published about a dozen books before this one. And I have written for many different publications over the years, but my focus has been business through all of that. And there was a point in the 1980s when I actually worked at IDG, which we can talk about as we go along.
Fantastic. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the main reasons I invited you on the show today was to talk about your fascinating and inspiring book, Future Forward. Because when we think about tech visionaries, and we speak to them about them a lot on this show, many will think of big personalities such as Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, etc. But there is a man called Pat McGovern that never sought the spotlight, and he's been overlooked for the contribution that he's made to the tech industry. So can you just set the scene a little and tell both me and the listeners a little more about Pat McGovern, the man who turned IDG into a $3 billion technology, media and venture capital empire?
Well, it's really the essence of what this book is about. Pat McGovern was, as you just described, a visionary who early on in the 1960s saw something that others didn't see, usually the formula for great success from entrepreneurs. And what he understood was that information technology was going to be a world-changing industry. And he also understood that somebody needed to sort of tell the story of this industry. There would be the doers who were making things. In those days, IBM was the 800-pound gorilla. But over time, he knew there would be other players. But what he envisioned was a thirst for knowledge, for fair-minded, deep research by very talented people who could tell the story of this industry as it was unfolding. So he set out to build International Data Group, a company that was based in the Boston area in the United States. And while he started with one publication, Computer World, he eventually, with a very clear path ahead, decided to make this a global entity. And he eventually had publications in nearly 100 countries, 300 publications, several hundred websites as it became more of a digital thing. And he was responsible for building amazing brands, not just Computer World. There was PC World and Mac World and Info World, CIO Magazine. I don't know how popular the For Dummies books are in other countries, but in the U.S., they became ubiquitous. You couldn't walk into a bookstore without seeing literally hundreds of titles. So he was on top of this real revolution.